Welcome to part one of the video on the knowledge bases for teaching. You need to know these knowledge bases because these are the knowledge bases you will draw on for your planning and implementing the curriculum. Now, as you watch the video, I'd like you to consider the following. Lee Shulman listed 7 types of knowledge needed for teaching. I would like you to list them and explain what these knowledge bases are. He also mentioned a knowledge base that is unique to teachers. I want you to explain why it is unique to teachers and how it differs from, for example, how a researcher might know the content. Then Pamela Grossman was the first researcher to come up with a model for how these knowledge bases fit together and what PCK is. What knowledge bases did she include in her model? And also, why do you think pedagogical content knowledge holds a central position in her model? So I'd like you to consider that. And then I would like you to contrast her model with that of the Cochran et al. Model. What are the similarities and what are the differences between the two models? Okay, we're going to be looking now at the knowledge bases needed for teaching. If you're to implement the curriculum, the planning that you need to do, what knowledge do you as a teacher need in order to do that planning effectively? Now, you have to realize teaching is a complex process. When you're in the classroom, there are many things happening. So classroom teaching, though, is central in education, and it includes all the activities that you do in that social setting of your classroom. Now, the aim of teaching is to ensure learners understand the content that you're teaching them through a series of activities that you provide that give them the opportunity for learning. Now, obviously, the more active the tasks, the better students will learn that material. Now, teaching is a complex process. It requires knowledge, it requires skills, it requires abilities of you as a teacher in the classroom. Now, the knowledge, skills, and abilities also need to continually be developed for quality teaching. So, doing your initial teacher training is only the beginning of your learning. To become an effective teacher, you need to be a continuous learner, a lifelong learner, and you need to develop your skills, your knowledge, and those abilities for teaching. Now, novice teachers, and you will be novice teachers when you start teaching, tend to lack the necessary confidence in their own teaching ability. They have difficulty mastering the content and maintaining the pedagogical flow. So you might know your content well, but mastering it for teaching is what is difficult, and maintaining that pedagogical flow so that there's no break in the process of learning. It must be a continuous flow. Novice teachers do struggle with that. Now, experienced teachers have developed a deeper understanding of their teaching through reflection. That's why reflective practice is so important. And they reflect on their teaching practices and their development of knowledge and development in teaching skills and abilities. So experienced teachers become effective teachers through reflective practice. Now, Shulman introduced the knowledge bases that he felt were necessary for teaching. Those included content knowledge, general pedagogical knowledge, which is the ability to maintain, the broad principles of classroom management, organization that actually transcend any subject matter. Then curriculum knowledge, in particular the grasp of the materials and the programs that serve as the tools of your trade. Which textbooks are you going to use? Which one will you find the most effective? Which learning programs can you put together? Or which learning programs can you use? Those are the tools of your trade. Then pedagogical content knowledge. Shulman referred to this as the special amalgam of both content and pedagogy that is uniquely the province of the teachers. In other words, pedagogical content knowledge is a type of knowledge only teachers develop. And it's your own form of professional understanding, how best to represent and to teach and what activities to use to teach a particular topic. You also need knowledge of your learners, specifically the learners in your class, but also of their general characteristics. So developmental stages, ways to motivate teenagers and so on. So you need knowledge of learners and their characteristics. You need knowledge of the educational contexts that you're working in, ranging from the workings of the group or the classroom that you're in, the governance of the school, finance of school districts and so on, the character of the community and cultures around the school. So you need knowledge of that context. And lastly, you need knowledge of the educational ends, purposes, values, and their philosophical and historical grounds. So you need that broader knowledge of the goals of education. And Shulman wrote all of this down in 1987. It was in 1986 that he first talked about these forms of knowledge, and this was him now crystallizing his ideas and putting them on paper. So there is Lee Shulman. Now, as he said, in this paper, he presented an argument regarding the content, character, and sources of knowledge that teachers need for teaching in order to try and professionalize the teaching as a career. Now, there is just a kind of a diagrammatical representation of Shulman's knowledge bases. So all of those knowledge bases are what teachers need for their professional knowledge. Now, these, just again, Shulman's knowledge bases: content knowledge, general pedagogical knowledge, curriculum knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge, knowledge of your learners and the characteristics, knowledge of educational contexts, knowledge of educational ends, purposes, and values. So those are the 7 knowledge bases that Shulman felt teachers need to draw on as part of their professional knowledge. And he introduced the term pedagogical content knowledge, which, as I said, he said is unique to teachers. Teachers develop this through experience. They think of the best representations, examples, activities to use to help learners understand the content that they are trying to teach. So what is pedagogical content knowledge? Well, as I said, it represents the blending of content and pedagogy into an understanding of how particular topics or problems or issues are organized, so how you put them together, represented, how you portray them, and adapted, and how you adapt them specifically to the diverse interests and abilities of learners in your classroom, and you present them for instruction. So that is what pedagogical content knowledge represents. So it includes the most useful forms of representations of those ideas. So diagrams, graphs, simulations, whatever you're using. The most powerful analogies, illustrations, examples, explanations, and demonstrations. So in a word, the ways of representing and formulating the subject that make it comprehensible to learners. So teachers start with their understanding of the content knowledge, and through thinking about what you're going to use, the representations, you transform that into something that becomes comprehensible to others. In other words, comprehensible to your learners. So it undergoes this transformation from the knowledge that a subject content specialist might have, but then through the teacher's planning and thinking, it gets reworked into something that is comprehensible to the. Now, Pamela Grossman then came up with the first kind of model for pedagogical content knowledge. There she had her subject matter knowledge, which included basically the content, the syntactic and the substantive structures. In other words, how that also includes how knowledge of science is put together, how knowledge is formed, and then the particular concepts that form and the ideas that are part of that subject. And then the general pedagogical content knowledge, which includes the learners and their learning, your classroom management, your curriculum and instruction, and the others which you didn't feel made as great an impact on forming your pedagogical content knowledge. So for her, pedagogical content knowledge represented the conceptions of the purposes, or included the conceptions of the purposes for teaching subject matter. Why are we teaching students this subject matter? Why is it important that students understand this subject matter? Then knowledge of students' understanding. Is there anything that students might not understand or have difficulty understanding? A teacher needs to know that. Bringing the teachers then curricular knowledge would include that, and also knowledge of instructional strategies. What type of instructional strategies to use to help develop students' understanding of that. So for Pamela Grossman, that is what pedagogical content knowledge represented. The conceptions of the purposes for teaching the subject, knowledge of the students' understanding of that subject content, curricular knowledge on that particular topic, and also knowledge of which instructional strategies to use in terms of covering that curriculum content. And that then fed into your knowledge of the context. The students, the community, the district, and the school would then have an influence on your pedagogical content knowledge, because you might have to choose different instructional strategies based on your context, for example. So this was her model of teacher knowledge presented in 1990. Now, Grossman argues that PCK is part of the practical knowledge that teachers have, and its construction meets the same methodological parameters as constructing that practical knowledge. In other words, you have to be practicing, you have to be working within it and reflecting, and so on. She represented the proposed knowledge, emphasizing the value of the content knowledge for the development of the curriculum. So that content knowledge was extremely important for developing the curriculum. And that is knowledge students had to understand. Now, from a paper I found, there are some arguments related to this idea of making content knowledge so important, but content knowledge of teachers affects what teachers do and the way they do it. So if you don't have good content knowledge, obviously you're not going to do things well, and the way that you do it won't be as effective as somebody who does have good content knowledge. Since teachers are active shapers of the curriculum, teachers make explicit their curriculum decisions. So your knowledge, your interests, your values are made explicit when you decide how to teach and what way you will teach a particular topic. So teachers can pay more attention to the content that dominated their own learning or what they have more interest in. So particularly for natural science with the 4 knowledge areas, you might want to focus and teach it and focus more on the content that dominated your own learning in your degree, whether it's life science or physical science or maybe earth science. But can you bring them all together? And what you tend to have more interest in. So as a curriculum shaper, teachers might let their own content knowledge that dominated their learning and their interests kind of shape how they teach things. Moreover, they can give less importance or even avoid content they have less knowledge of. Now, if you had choices over how you could present the curriculum, you might do that with CAPS, though. It's very prescriptive, so you have to follow the curriculum. But if you had a choice, you might want to avoid teaching students about the rock cycle, for example, if you don't know any geology. Now, teachers adapt a particular curriculum as much as possible to their own disciplinary knowledge. So that tends to be the tendency, is that you adapt a particular curriculum as much as you can to your own disciplinary knowledge. So this is like an argument against focusing too much on the content knowledge. Okay, now Grossman was the first person to systemize the knowledge components of PCK, or of the professional knowledge to form PCK. So in her model, there are 4 interacting components: subject matter knowledge, general pedagogical knowledge, knowledge of context, and pedagogical content knowledge. So subject matter, general pedagogical matter, and knowledge of context would help form a teacher's pedagogical content knowledge, and those will obviously influence each other. Now, PCK occupies a central position in her model, and it's seen as the transformation of all the other knowledge bases. So it gets transformed or changed into something that is uniquely the province of the teacher. So just there are her general, the knowledge bases that interact. So please what's important here is the transformation, and that your content knowledge, your pedagogical, general pedagogical knowledge, and knowledge of your context get transformed as you plan for teaching. And just remember that for in the Grossman model, subject matter knowledge. If you don't have subject matter knowledge, it's very difficult to develop PCK. So subject matter knowledge was central in her model. So another model we're going to look at is the integrative model by Cochran et al., De Ruyter and King. That's what I mean by et al. Now, their model had 5 components. Pedagogical content knowledge, again, is there in the middle, with knowledge of students, knowledge of subject matter, knowledge of pedagogy, and knowledge of the environmental context, all coming together to form PCK. Now, and up until about 1986, teacher education research focused mainly on general pedagogical methods, and it was independent of subject matter. So, for example, questioning techniques or classroom management skills, how did they shape the effectiveness of learning, and so on. This work revealed that a significant number of instructional strategies do improve student achievement. So there are there's research-based evidence to say which instructional strategies actually help improve student achievement. Now, there was renewed recognition of the importance of a teacher's subject matter knowledge, especially with the reform initiatives in the US to make teaching a profession. And it was clear that both teachers' pedagogical knowledge and teachers' subject matter knowledge are crucial to have a good teaching and student understanding. So both of those knowledge bases are highly important to help students understand the content, and also for the teacher to know what to teach effectively. So they argued that pedagogical content knowledge is a type of knowledge that is, well, Shulman said this, is unique to teachers, as it is the integration or synthesis of a teacher's pedagogical knowledge and their subject matter knowledge. So it's a synthesis, it's coming together, it's a mingling, it's a mixing, it's a transformation of those two knowledge bases. Now, pedagogical content knowledge is a form of knowledge that makes a person a teacher rather than a subject area specialist. So a teacher will differ from a biologist, not necessarily in terms of the quality or quantity of their subject matter or their subject matter knowledge, but in how that knowledge is organized and used. So in a teacher's mind, that knowledge is organized and used for teaching purposes, and it's different in a biologist. It would be organized for research and so on. Now, Cochran et al. Defined pedagogical content knowledge from a constructivist perspective. In other words, using constructivism, where people build their own knowledge. It's built on a foundation of what they know already, and so on. They said PCK is an integrated understanding that is synthesized from teacher knowledge of pedagogy, their subject matter content, student characteristics, and the environmental context of learning. So those are the 4 things that make PCK. So in other words, they said that a PCK is using the understanding of the subject matter concepts, using your understanding of learning processes and strategies for teaching that specific content of a discipline in a way that enables students to construct their own knowledge effectively in the given context that you are in. So it's how teachers use that knowledge so that learners can construct their own understanding of the content. Now, it's not radically different from Shulman's idea, but they have put relatively more emphasis on the environmental context of learning and the teacher's knowledge of students, which makes sense from a constructivist point of view, because your environment is what creates your experiences, and the teacher's knowledge of the students and how she would do or he would use that knowledge to build a learning strategy that helps learners construct their own knowledge. That is why the emphasis is there. If you understand constructivism, you will understand why they put the emphasis there. Now, PCK comprises the 4 knowledge components. You can see they are represented as circles with expanding experience. So in other words, the teacher's knowledge grows as they teach for longer and as they learn. That's important to know. Your knowledge will expand and grow. Why is it expanding? Well, pre-service teacher's knowledge in each of the areas can be thought of as a beginning. So you will leave here with that beginning understanding, with a limited focus. And it becomes elaborated with experience and reflective activities. So that's why it expands. The 4 components become integrated. So they're no longer, they can't be considered separate knowledge bases. They are integrated into something new. And that integration is PCK. So the integration process results in a conceptual change and a conceptual integration within the teacher to the point that the resulting PCK knowledge is the expertise that teachers have. It's distinctly different from any form of knowledge from which it was constructed. So it's no longer looks like the environmental context knowledge or the pedagogy, knowledge of pedagogy, or your knowledge of students or your knowledge of subject matter. It is now this unique integration of PCK.